Hello, English 2 fam. So now let's break down Act 2. Yeah? So in Act 2, Macbeth has this big internal conflict, right? Should he become a murderer and kill King Duncan, a king that has shown him nothing but respect and rewarded him with titles for being noble? Offering him Thane of Cawdor, which, by the way, a Thane is a Scottish lord. If there's questions about, well, what's a Thane? It's a Scottish lord. So in Act 2, Macbeth is like, you know what? At first, he's like, I'm not going to do this. But then he promises his wife, Lady Macbeth, that he will be a man and uphold his promise and kill his king. And Duncan goes to visit Macbeth and Lady Macbeth and bestows them all these honors as a thanks for how noble Macbeth was in the war. So on the way to killing King Duncan, Macbeth has a vision of a dagger. And this is the first of many apparitions or visions or ghosts that Macbeth has in the play. Now, there are two ways the audience can interpret this, and it always depends on the director involved. But these can be illusions in his mind because he's going crazy in the guilt, or we come back to the witches, right? It's the witches haunting Macbeth and having Macbeth carry out their bidding. And so the dagger comes to him, and this is really the final push for him to become a murderer. So we see this downfall of this noble man become a murderer, and it's his ambition that ends up being his tragic flaw. So the next thought is when you look at Duncan's death, so Macbeth makes a huge mistake, right? He returns to Lady Macbeth with his hands covered in blood, and he's still holding what? The daggers. What was he supposed to do, team? He was supposed to leave the daggers in the guards' hands to basically frame them. And he won't go back because he's scared. He's like already all messed up in the head from this murder. Who goes back to plant the daggers? Lady Macbeth, right? She says, give me the daggers. The only reason Lady Macbeth didn't just kill Duncan herself, she notes in the show, is that while Duncan is sleeping, he looks like Lady Macbeth's father asleep. So she goes back, she plants the daggers, covers herself with the blood to basically also, or rather covers the blood on the guards to make it look like they killed King Duncan. So right after the murder, there's all this knocking. Lady Macbeth and Macbeth are covered in blood, and they're like, oh shoot, it's like 4 a.m. We gotta go look like we were asleep and wash all this blood off and like burn our bloody clothes. Macduff and Lennox arrive, and they are also high lords. Macduff is a Thane himself, and they arrive to greet Duncan early in the morning to obviously see that he's murdered. Now, Macduff right away is like, this looks shady. Because if you remember, Macbeth, when he goes in to check on Duncan to see that he's murdered, even though he knows he murdered him and the audience knows, aka dramatic irony because the characters don't know, when he goes back, he kills the guards. And he kills the guards because, well, we know he doesn't want the guards to snitch because he thinks that the guards were like kind of awake, even though they were passed out drunk when he murdered Duncan. And when he comes back, he claims and tells Macduff and Lennox and everyone in the castle, like, oh, I killed the guards in a fit of rage and fury and love for my king. Well, Macduff's like, that looks kind of shady. Why wouldn't you just let them not kill them so we could question them? You could always kill them after, right? So that is very shady. And Macduff notes that right away. Now, here's what you have to know about Malcolm and Donalbain. And remember, Malcolm and Donalbain are Duncan's sons. So they're the true heirs. They are not given the crown because they flee. But they flee for good reason. And I actually love the way the production that I have you watching shows this because, they start to run after to check on their father. And Malcolm's like, hold up, come here. Like, I have a better idea. Because if they stay in Scotland, what's going to happen to them? Whoever murdered their dad is going to come after them next because obviously they want the crown. And the reason they split up, Malcolm goes to England and Donalbain goes to Ireland, they split up because if the murderer is going to come after them, if they're split up, they can protect their lineage, they can protect their bloodline, right? Because the murderer isn't going to have time to go to like both countries, okay? This is the year like 1000 whatever. So this person, if they're going to go after them, they can only go after one of them. So they split up. And but because they flee the murder scene and don't stay, everyone else in Scotland ends up suspecting them of murdering the king, which is why they don't get the crown. And that's a moment that students get confused about, which is what I wanted to share with you. The reason Macbeth is crowned king next is because the heirs are gone and there was just two huge wars in Scotland, right? The Civil War that MacDonald started and then also the war against Norway. And the big war hero for both battles were Macbeth. And King Duncan was just honoring Macbeth and granting him all these titles because he was able to win both wars to save Scotland. And so he ends up being the most likely candidate, like the next best option for king. Now, there's someone else who's suspicious in Act 2, and that is Banquo. Because Banquo, other than Lady Macbeth, he's the only person who knows of the prophecies. Now, even though Banquo is Macbeth's closest friend and confidant, he notes in the play, he's like, I will follow you, Macbeth, but if, I only in a way that's going to be noble. Like he says at some point, like, you played most foully for this, basically noting, I know you're the murderer. And we know, and Macbeth knows that Banquo's sons, aka Fleance, his descendants, they're a threat to Macbeth too, even though Fleance is young, well, baby, not baby, he was like maybe like 5 or 6, but he eventually is going to prove to be a threat because of what the witches prophesied for him. Okay, that's Act 2, your breakdown. Let me know if you have questions.